Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. After downplaying the clash with Indian troops at Tawang, Beijing is now playing the victim card, accusing India of LAC fighting. China's attempts to alter the status quo at the line of actual control has been exposed from time to time in blatant violations of several agreements signed with India. The United States too reacted to the clash and backed India's claim of pushing the aggressor China back. But how can India continue to counter China and its growing belligerence? Militarily, India is leaving no stone unturned to counter its neighbor. New helipads, roads, bridges and infrastructure is coming up. We have much catching up to do here, there's no denying. New Delhi is also continuing its diplomatic push that brings peace and tranquility back to border areas. On the economic front, India has to reduce its dependence on Chinese imports, for example, but this is a long-term fight. We have a belligerent and expansionist neighbor to contend with, and China will not mend its ways. In fact, the situation will only get tougher as India becomes a stronger rival of the Dread Dragon. So what more can be done? I will take that to our guests, our experts joining us in just a bit. But first, let's take a look at India's infrastructure boost along the LAC. First up, an overall picture. Remember, there's a over 3,000-kilometer line, which is the LAC between India and China. Now, according to the government, the BRO, the Border Roads Organization, has built over 2,000 kilometers of roads along the LAC in the last 5 years. Post Galwan, 32 critical roads along the LAC have been sanctioned. Apart from that, there's been a lot of other infrastructure build-up, like modular, temperature-controlled, relocatable habitats that have been built in eastern Ladakh. 22,000 troops and storage for 450 tanks and howitzer can now be housed in eastern Ladakh, and similar structures are now coming up in other states like Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim. Interestingly, all bridges along the LAC are also being upgraded to withstand heavy vehicles. Underground munition depots, 3D printed permanent defenses are all something that India is looking to build. Also, specifically talking about Ladakh, many of our viewers would be aware there is the Umling La, which is the highest motorable road now. This strategically connects Chizumle and Demchok villages. Remember, Demchok is another friction point that has come up between India and China earlier. Let's also talk specifically about Arunachal Pradesh, the latest friction point. Now, this state has got the lion's share of the highway projects allocated, announced just this month, and that's worth up to 44,000 crore rupees. The showpiece of the infrastructure that is being built up in Arunachal is the Sela Tunnel, which is nearing completion. And the Sena Tunnel and the Nechipu tunnels will connect West Kameng and Tawang year-round. That's important. Tawang, remember, of course, is the latest point of clash between Indian and Chinese troops. But India is often criticized for its increasing trades with China, its dependence. Is it that India has done nothing here? Well, that's not entirely true. But this is, of course, a slow process to reduce your dependency. Take a look at some of these key industries where we are dependent on Chinese imports, for example. The first one I'm highlighting is active pharmaceutical ingredients, also called APIs. The current imports that India has stand at about 68% from China alone. So what is India doing? The government has identified 53 APIs. They're targeting a cut of 25% in API import and its reliance by 2024. There is also a PLI scheme that has been rolled out for local manufacturing units, and various such units are in the process of starting production. Let's also take a look at toys now. The current import lies at 86% of all import from China. So what is the government doing? It is, of course, looking to plan a 3,500 crore PLI scheme. Compliance with BIS norms are being pushed. So custom duties are being raised, import norms are being tightened. That all makes it harder to import or those who export to India, and beneficial for those who make it locally. The official data also says that imports from China has actually plummeted in this category by 80% in the last 3 years. And export of made in India toys has actually surged to never before levels. Then let's also take a look at electronic components. 37% of all of India's imports is currently coming from China. What is India doing in this regard? Higher duties, incentives for local manufacturers, PLI schemes to give companies incentive of incremental sales. These also include PLIs for telecom, networking products, solar modules, for example. Finally, let's also take a look at auto components, another key category where bulk of India's imports come from China, 30% in this regard. Now, India has sought to diversify its supply chains. PLI scheme with an outlay of 259 billion rupees is planned. I do want to add here how India handled COVID, for example, is also a big aspect. India did much better than China. And there was a lot of pressure on India for foreign-made vaccines, even Chinese vaccines, which turned out to be third grade, frankly. And all of this was resisted. India showed true Atmanirbharta here with Indian-made vaccines, and one fully developed in India, which was the world's envy, and especially China's envy. Finally, I talked about diplomatic channels. What has India done in this regard? How has it tried to tackle China? First and foremost, of course, Foreign Affairs Ministers has made it clear that there can be no normalcy in China's ties with China without peace at the border. The Prime Minister also, remember, had also given a firm message that the era of expansionism is over, although his political opponents do criticize him for never really, truly going on and mentioning China. In July 2022, earlier this year, Jaishankar met his Chinese counterpart and he called for an early resolution of the LAC. Diplomacy is also a slow process and a lot never really comes out in the open. But remember, in the meantime, there's been a rise and a formation of the Quad. This is, of course, without saying it in as many words, a bloc to contain China's belligerence, especially in the Southeast Asia region. With this backgrounder, let's also take this to our experts. How can India counter a belligerent China? We've got multiple experts from various fields joining us.
We have seen the PRC continue to amass forces and build military infrastructure along the so-called LAC, but I would defer you to India in terms of their views.
There was a face of kind of situation, but this time it was a clash. Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has confirmed it. Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has told us that how it happened, how it was an attempt to change the status quo of that particular area, and how China got the befitting reply from Indian Army.
A full panel of experts joining us. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former diplomat and former DG ICCR. Major General Sanjay Meston, he's a defense analyst. Vijay Kranti, senior journalist who particularly tracks China. Dr. Tarak Karta, former director, National Security Council Secretariat. We'll also be joined by Dheeraj Nair, who's an economist, formerly with the Niti Aayog. Let me begin with the military aspect. Major General Sanjay Meston, I did outline some of the steps, especially infrastructure-wise, that India has done as far as the north and the northeast sectors are concerned, specifically along the LAC. I want to understand from you what more needs to be done in this regard, and where do you think India really needs to push, especially after multiple clashes with the Chinese forces and really a very clear agenda that Chinese has clearly laid out of what it wants to do with India.
Shivani, good evening. Excellent topic you have raised today.
Thank you, sir.
I think coming straight to the military perspective, I feel, number one, many things have actually been done, and we are quite in a comfortable position. I would highlight that, and I would substantiate that. But firstly, what all can be done? Yes, infrastructure needs to be hastened up further, and I must state that infrastructure development is an ongoing process. This has been going on since last 20-30 years. Luckily, I have served in this border for about 6 tenures, and also I have been in the Military Operations Directorate as a brigadier looking after China specifically. So my knowledge is quite updated, and I can speak with authority. So everywhere infrastructure impetus has been going on since many, many years. And now with the advancing technology, for example, road construction, earlier, you had to do a physical survey which used to take about 6 months. Today we have the UAVs, so therefore it gives an impetus. So therefore what I am trying to say, road construction has been speeded up many, many times. And another advantage is that the present dispensation, or I would say the present government, has done something very, very good, that the devolution of powers has been given in the BRO right up to the commandant level. So implication of that is that the decision making
is faster,
becomes extremely easily. So the bureaucratic hurdles have been removed, and therefore the person on ground can do the activities very, very quickly. But let me also put in a word of caution. See, the terrain on our side, especially in Arunachal Pradesh side, including Sikkim, where I commanded my brigade, actually the terrain is very, very fragile. On the Chinese side, they have an advantage because of the Tibetan plateau. In our side, it is so fragile a terrain that despite construction, firstly working season, yes, I'll come to the working season. In Arunachal, by and large, the working season is October, November, December, January. Otherwise, balance of the years, it rains heavily over there. And therefore, what happens? Bridges get washed away, culverts get washed away, and there are huge landslides taking place. And even when I was commanding my brigade in Sikkim, the Jawaharlal Nehru Marg axis, which was being widened as a double lane project, there used to be so many frequent landslides that it used to be extremely difficult for the BRO to maintain it. So what I'm trying to highlight, that despite all the impetus being given to the road infrastructure development, we have to understand these criticalities, because the nation will expect everything to be done immediately.
But
yes, this is an ongoing process, but these are the limitations which I want to highlight. Now coming on to the defenses. Shivari, let me tell very proudly that today Indian Army all along the watershed, along the line of actual control, whether it is Sikkim, whether it is Arunachal Pradesh, whether it is including in so-called eastern Ladakh area, including DBO. Let me tell you, we have permanent defenses, bunkers to fight. And what the implication of this is that we have got 100% bunkers. For example, a battalion requires certain number of bunkers to fight. We have got full 100% all along the watershed. That gives us so much advantage that tomorrow, even when the Chinese come to intrude, we detect so easily by our men, and therefore our response time is very, very quick to counter them. Secondly, not only that, including in the second tier of defenses and in the third tier of defenses, we have got bunkers made. In second tiers, almost most of the places we have achieved 100%. For why second tier and third tier? When reinforcements come from different sectors. Another thing in Arunachal Pradesh, there is a Arunachal highway, which actually is at the foothills, so it climbs certain hills, etc. So it is covering all the major, I would say the low-lying areas of Arunachal Pradesh. But now we have also sanctioned DPR has just about to be sanctioned for a frontier, trans-frontier highway. That means all along the line of actual control, about 100 kilometers back, we will have all those 7 valleys or ridges being connected laterally. So this will give us very, very advantage, so that troops tomorrow can move in from the least threatened areas to the most threatened areas. So this is going to be another advantage. So military-wise, and of course Air Force-wise, we have got S-400s deployed, and we are aware the exercises which are being done by the Indian Air Force, by 4 stations where they are taking off. So we have deployed adequate Air Force, UAVs have been deployed. We have moved mechanized forces, including in northern Sikkim, where it was very difficult. We have got mechanized forces, including in DBO. We have got mechanized forces. When I say mechanized forces, it means armored, and it implies mechanized infantry. We have deployed all along eastern Ladakh. So force level wise, I would say we have a major advantage, and Chinese deployment is very minimal on the ground. Example, in Nathula, when I was commanding, as against my brigade which was deployed on the watershed, the Chinese literally had just about 2 odd companies. And including in the Doklam area, where they had come in 2018, let me tell you, they have to cross some passes like Sinchila, etc., Merugla, and we can observe them. So we have got lot of reaction time. So defenses wise we are much better. But another concern I would like to highlight. See, we are also concerned about the Chicken's Neck area.
Okay.
Siliguri corridor. Now, Chumbi Valley leads onto that. We have got dominating heights even over there. But the concern is that in western Bhutan, that is, opposite the Sikkim sector, is the Chumbi Valley, and thereafter the Bhutan starts. So it is western Bhutan. Now there the Chinese have started making roads and tracks in last 10-12 years in that it is referred to as the MK Ridge. And there is a pass also, Trebola Pass. So, from that area, Bhutan, they can develop something towards Indian, Siliguri corridor. That's a major concern. And therefore, diplomatically, I think we have a ambassador here. He would also highlight.
Right.
We have got excellent relations with Bhutan, but as of now, today it is happening that China and Bhutan have also started having diplomatic relations, and I believe something has been signed recently without taking India into agreement. So
sir, before I move to that aspect, I just want very quickly for you to answer this. There are a lot of people who believe, and from time to time we see these assessments, that India is still way behind as far as the Chinese infrastructure along the LACs. Now, from what you are describing, you are saying India actually has a more advantageous position. So how will you answer those who believe that that is not the case?
See, actually, we are there on ground. We know the situation, what they are doing. Yes, I would highlight that. Chinese, for example, have made roads right up to Nathula Pass, where we also have a proper two-lane access going up to Nathula. Now, what is happening that their side of the road, there are certain advantages. Terrain-wise, they are on the higher plateau plains, so they don't have these problems of landslides, roads, all these, etc., roadblocks, etc., so they have an advantage.
Okay.
Number two, what they have been focusing on, they have not been focusing on troop deployment. Yes, troop deployment has happened recently in eastern Ladakh, but in the other area, they are focusing on constructing villages.
Exactly.
Constructing, in the garb of villages, they are going to have camps, logistic dumps, etc., so that tomorrow when their army gets mobilized, then they can be of use to them. But as on date, what is a troop deployment? It is a border defense regiment, which is actually equivalent to our ITBB or to a BSF. It's not the regular army.
Okay.
So regular army only comes for exercises to patrol areas and all. Yes, so their advantage they have. Now coming on to even that, even if they are having so-called helipads and airfields coming up, their lift capability just reduces to about 37% because they are sitting at a height of 17,000, 18,000 feet. Our aircraft taking off will have no problem on lift capability, so our refueling, carrying of fuel will be very, very, whatever it's a capacity, plus we can carry armament. In their case, they cannot, either they carry armament, then the fuel is limited. So they have problems. And last, Shivani, I would also like to highlight, country gets a perception that it is the Chinese always coming into our area. No, yes. I would like to correct that perception. All along the line of actual control, there are certain areas of dispute and differences mutually agreed upon to by both sides. And therefore, we also carry out patrols, send large number of patrols with a good strength of 100 to 80 to 100 people duly armed. Right up to our claim lines, and the Chinese at times contest it, otherwise they can't. So we are also sending, but that cannot be glorified or stated in the media because those are confidential issues.
Yeah.
So suffice it to say, we do it.
Okay.
So it is not only Chinese.
What you're saying is that both in terms of attitude and in terms of infrastructure, there is no need for the country to feel that we're anyways lacking, because sometimes the criticism also is that why is it that China only is doing all of these things? And why is it that they are only poking us all the time? Why can't we give them a taste of their own medicine? Now, before I go across on the entire diplomatic front, because a lot of our experts are joining on that front, a lot of this has to be solved through diplomacy. Obviously, nobody's asking for a war here. But I want to go across to the economic angle. Vijay Nair is joining us. Dheeraj Nair is joining us. Dheeraj, thanks a lot for your time. I want to understand from you the criticism that has been mounted recently, especially after the Tawang clash, that, India's trade surplus and imports from China are only increasing. The government has countered that by saying you look at the rise, which is over 2,000%. before 2014. And if you look at the rise over the last few years, it's only 100% or so. What do you think is the situation currently vis-a-vis India and China trade-wise, and what more can India do? I outlined some of the things India has done for the long term.
See, I mean, the truth of the matter is that in the year 2000, around the year 2000, our trade deficit with China was only about $1 billion. Now it's getting close to 100 billion. So the fact is that it's steadily been rising. It may have risen faster in a certain period, may have risen slightly slower in another period. But the point is that it's going one way. It's rising, right? So there's little doubt about that. And the only answer really is, because if you look at the pattern, what is it that we import from there and what is it that we export? I mean, essentially our exports end up being, raw materials of various kinds. And most of our manufactured goods, particularly in sectors like electronics, but even things like toys and so on, come from light manufactured goods, come from China. So the only answer to that is strengthening manufacturing capacity. And to be fair to this government, they are focusing on it. They have focused on manufacturing, unlike most other recent governments.
They've been criticized for it, actually, of putting, quote unquote, all their eggs in the manufacturing basket, as one famous economist once said.
Well, I mean, there's no other way you're going to bridge this deficit with China, because if you're going to be dependent on all our manufactured goods from China,
exactly,
then, and we don't have a manufacturing base, then how do you expect it? We can't stop imports from China if we don't have substitutes here.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we need certain things and they have to come from somewhere. So I think building that capacity, for example, the government is now investing heavily in, trying to build semiconductors. It's managed to bring a certain amount of telecom assembly here. Now the rest of the value chain is coming. Also post-COVID, the trend of firms wanting to move out of China, countries wanting to diversify supply chains. So all of this gives us an opportunity. Now you won't see the result in the trade deficit in the next 6 months. But I suspect if you look at the next 3 to 5 years, you'll start to see that change. The only way is to strengthen our own competitiveness, make ourselves an attractive destination for manufacturing for both foreign investors and Indian investors, because ultimately our deficit with China is about manufacturing. At the same time, what is our advantage? Services. And services, in many ways, involves movement of people across borders and so on, where there are other kinds of barriers. So I think we should continue to push for our services, for our agriculture, to get access to the Chinese market. That's, of course, a much harder thing than goods. But I think that is something we can continue to do. Some amount of IT investment exports do go to China, but not enough compared to what go to other countries. So I think we can push our services agenda. But ultimately, if we want to make a significant dent to this deficit, it's only by strengthening our manufacturing base. And if you look at the strategic picture or the defense picture, ultimately, defense spending will only go up significantly if our GDP goes up significantly. And our GDP is going to go up significantly only if manufacturing grows significantly. So for me, you can say all eggs in one basket, but that's really the basket which matters.
Okay. Can I ask you a counter, though, that a lot of critics mount, Dheeraj, which is that, this whole talk of Atmanirbharta is very flashy, but actually on ground, it is not the case, and it will not be the case for many, many years, possibly even decades to come. Now, how do you counter, if at all, the criticism that comes in for the present dispensation? I have to bring in the political aspect because, of course, it's the present government that can take these calls, that, you're not doing enough and Atmanirbharta is just a slogan.
No, that's not. I don't think that's a fair criticism. I mean, I agree. So far, in terms of, outcomes, the percentage of manufacturing in GDP has not gone up significantly. It remains around 15, 16, which is what it's been for the last 30 years. But if you look at the attempts, as I said, there are specific programs in electronics. There's the PLI now, which is helping firms scale up across 13 sectors. Tariffs have been raised. That, of course, has been criticized also. People who say that they haven't done enough also criticize the fact that tariffs have been raised to give domestic industry a leg up. So there are certainly corporate taxes have been cut, to record East Asian levels for the first time, in the 2019 budget. So I think a fair amount is being done. It's not fair to say that, no attempt is being made to give a boost to manufacturing. But the fact is that there are several factors, with land acquisition remains a challenge. Hiring labor remains a challenge. The cost of capital remains high compared to other countries. So I'm not trying to discount the challenges, but at least a start has been made.
No, actually, you make a good point. If a lot of our polity wants that India should reduce its dependence on China and especially cut its imports, then politically, we also have to come together and push the kind of reforms we need to match our pace, to get to where China is. Now, unfortunately, the problem is that politics takes over. You criticize with one hand, you'll derail reforms with the other. The two can't go together.
Yeah, in fact, I think, if at all opposition wishes to criticize, they should criticize on the basis of not enough reform or not fast enough reform, rather than the fact, rather than opposing reform, which is what happens right now. I mean, it's not like the opposition is trying to say, let's do our land, labor, capital, power reforms, so that we become competitive. So if at all we need pressure from the opposition, we need popular opinion, it's to get all those things right. Because, this is frankly, on manufacturing, this is our last chance now, because the world is looking for an alternative. And if we cannot be that alternative now, then, some other places
we
like
might
Vietnam
miss the bus.
And so on, Bangladesh may become that alternative. So I think it's time that the government has made certain moves, certain other reforms remain to be done. If we can do them in the next couple of years, then you will see the situation change.
Okay.
If we don't, then we shouldn't complain about.
We'll continue to lag behind as we have against China over the last few decades. I saw that Mr. Kranti was, nodding his head when I talked about reforms push and how everybody needs to come together on this fact. Yes, Mr. Kranti, you want to add to the couple of facets we've discussed before I move to the diplomatic issue as well?
Yeah, this economic and other issues are very much related to when it comes to China. Everything finally, it is your policy, it is your diplomacy, it is your politics, it's your way of dealing with China, which is going to make the difference. What I see that we have been so far for last many decades, we have been cheated every time, and still we keep believing Chinese. So I think now slowly we have started learning over past few years. We have started learning that their nature. We have started understanding their nature, but still we have not come to that level that we should handle them head on that. For example, there are many agreements with China, but their style is have an agreement and through that agreement take some advantage, make some promises and have this agreement. And the moment agreement is signed, you absorb the advantages and forget the promises. So I think now Indian diplomacy has arrived at a point where it has to, when dealing with China, you should not talk of any hopes to get something and for an agreement. Best is you talk about what is on the table.
And therefore, do you feel that Mr. Jaishankar's approach that we can't go back to normalcy, as he very famously has said, till you resolve these LSA issues, is the right approach to take?
I think this is, I see the first sign of change in Indian approach. And Mr. Jaishankar's this specific stand is very much, it signifies that. And what I feel is that there are other things which we have to do very clearly with China. We have been defensive all through these decades. I think this is time to be offensive. We have to identify the soft belly of China and all those points where when you hit, it hurts most.
Which is?
There are many issues. There, for example, on Tibet, why the hell we should say Tibet is an internal part of or integral part of China, or we say it is internal matter? Why? They are they never give us any concession on Kashmir. Why should we give on Tibet? Why should we give
Kashmir?
On Xinjiang?
Look at what they're doing in Arunachal Pradesh. They claim the whole of it.
Yeah, this is our problem, that we have never been aggressive. We have to be aggressive on Tibet, on Xinjiang, on southern Mongolia, on Hong Kong and on Taiwan.
But sir, can I just say, I've been hearing this at least since Galwan predominantly, but before that as well. It hasn't happened. Why?
Please repeat.
I'm saying I'm hearing this, that we should be pressing them where it hurts the most for some years now, especially since Galwan, but it hasn't quite happened. Why?
Yes, this is I don't know why, but it has to change.
Okay.
Now it is time, and we know China is very, very sensitive. Whatever they say, they are so sensitive to even one news published in Times of India or in an American newspaper or a newspaper in Africa. They are very sensitive. They react very strongly. Their diplomat, leave aside their own diplomatic conduct. They start even almost like barking on the host governments. They behave like that. They shout at the host country's journalists.
But then
So,
the opposite,
Yes,
the other side to this is you look at what happened with vis-a-vis US and China, sir, with Nancy Pelosi's visit. I mean, it almost came down to a warlike situation between China and Taiwan. Maybe that's why we don't do it, because we don't want to risk this.
No. See, the risk question comes when we are afraid.
Okay.
So why we should be afraid? If China is hitting you on one point, you have such a huge platform to hit them. I counted. Tibet is there, East Turkestan, which they call Xinjiang, is there, Southern Mongolia, which they call Inner Mongolia, is there. They have occupied these countries. Now the latest they occupied is Hong Kong. We should stand up. We talk of Palestinians. We have been beating our chest all over the world on Palestinians. But we don't care about what China has done to Tibetans, what they have done to the Uyghurs, what they have done to the Mongolians.
Sir, can I bring in my other two guests who haven't spoken now? And Dr. Tarakata, I request your indulgence. I'm giving a lot of time to all of our guests because this is a deep topic. I want everybody to express their thoughts. But I'll first go across to the ambassador joining us. Sir, you want to add from what Mr. Kranti is saying? Why are we not seeing a quote-unquote belligerent India versus a belligerent China? What other way is there to counter the Red Dragon?
Shivani, thank you very much. Your program is called Play Speak, and I think I'm not going to indulge in diplomatics. And let us have a plain talk about where we stand and what China is all about.
Sure enough.
1991, when I left China on a diplomatic posting to the United Nations from Beijing, at that time, the GDP of China and the GDP of India, there was a differential of about $50 per head in favor of India. Chinese GDP was lower than Indian GDP per capita. And today, it's twice or I think 3 times our GDP per capita. How does China get over there? Not by belligerence or not by anything at all, because China has calculated. And please remember that the ambition of China to become number one is not today, yesterday, or about 10 years ago.
Sure.
It's more than 50 years ago that they had this ambition. But they have worked slowly, measurably in that direction by emerging to be the most important, the largest trading nation of the world. So what I'm saying here is that eventually the Chinese strength has come from its growing economy. In that growing economy, the military has now begun to match up on the ambition of China. And with the change of leadership in China, Xi Jinping taking, they have become vocally ambitious, and they vocally express their ambition now to be number one. But they had this ambition always. It's not the first time.
Sure.
That is point number one. Point number two really here is India has begun to work towards reforms or trade, etc., 30 years ago. But I think lots of data has been already given. The point is that we have not really matched up with our ambition. Our politics does not allow us to really go as fast as China has done. Number 3, today, I think the disconnection between India and China economically is impossible. We might talk about it. But today, if China stops export of APIs to India, and please mind you, China can do it. China has done in the past to punish India. They stopped import of the iron ore from India for 6 months. It accumulated at the port. So if China stops export of APIs to India before we can absorb the shock, where would India's pharmaceutical industry be? Transmission equipment, power equipment, you name it. Solar panels. Leave out the electronics and the toys. Those are consumer products. I think we can live without them. But infrastructural material, industrial material, which actually helps our economy.
Yes, I understand.
Our dependence on China is huge. And therefore, this kind of disconnection is impossible really at the moment unless we want to hurt ourselves. And if you look at the breakup of the Chinese exports to India, more than 50-60% of that really is infrastructural.
Yes, I played the breakup of some of the top exports from China. Those obviously include electronic components, auto components, toys, and I talked about the pharmaceutical ingredients.
Absolutely. Therefore, I think rather than, I'm sorry I'm using the word, we cannot afford to be jingoistic. We have to be measured in our approach. And I think when EAM Jaishankar says that the relationship cannot become normal. I think the relationship always has been different from normal. We have always had that problem. You mentioned Arunachal Pradesh. The claim of China on Arunachal Pradesh is not new.
True.
It has been there. It has been there since past when we the 1950s. So the first, it is not new really. And the McMahon line, which we claim as an international border, Chinese claim is to be a disputed line of control. So that is the situation we are in.
So, sir, what is it that you would like to see? How, while being diplomatic, while of course not being belligerent, and maybe you've given the answer as to why we are not belligerent that Mr. Kranti was referring to. We have many balances to cater to. What is it that you think India needs to do? Because we know that China is going to increasingly trouble us.
Absolutely. And that's the reason I was laying the background, because I think what we need to understand is that when we are on a wicket as sensitive as we are on for our economy, militarily, I'm quite confident that I agree with the General that we can take them on maybe for some time.
Yes.
But again, the supplies are going to be affected. So maybe we can. But the overall strength of the nation is going to suffer. Therefore, what I'm suggesting here is what the EM says, that we keep talking at a diplomatic level. We keep growing our strength economically, militarily. We keep developing our infrastructure. We need to develop our infrastructure. We need to develop economy. But please remember, the economic development is not a 1 day or 2 days task. It's going to take decades. So it's a slow game. In the meantime, developing villages, when you have population at the border, the aggression from the other side that becomes that much more difficult. Now, I'm talking in readers, I'm talking very briefly, a kind of a macro picture, but I think our strategy has to be one of patience, developing ourselves both economically and infrastructure-wise. And till that time, depend upon coalitions, alliances, international picture, work with others to keep the Chinese at bay.
Very quickly, since you brought up that point, and Dr. Tarakatha, I'm coming to you next. Very quickly, sir, the Quad and other alliances, etc., are they truly going to help us? Or is this all shosha, frankly, at the end of the day? Ultimately, as the knowledge has also dawned on us, we have to fight our own battles.
Absolutely, we fight our own battles. But in what about the battle? I'm talking about the contest with China. In the contest, which includes many battles, many wars, and many challenges, international support, international alliances, they are important to develop political, economic, other pressure.
Okay.
So even if the USA does not come with us militarily, there are many other ways in which they can work with us.
Sir, I absolutely do have to go to Tarakatha now. Ma'am, very many thanks for your patience today. You've heard from everybody else. What is it? You've obviously been telling me over the last 2 days that, this is the kind of China that we have to get used to, and this is Xi's China. What more do you expect from them in days to come, in years to come, and how best can India be prepared, ma'am?
See, you see that every time there is a clash on the border, especially even earlier in Demchok area, after the clash, the Chinese come there in full force. Even if they didn't have infrastructure there earlier, they will come there with such heavy, presence that you then have to sort of push in your own troops. This up and down thing will go on for some time. That is what I was trying to say. As they react, as Major General Weston very clearly brought out, they are in a different kind of an orientation than us, but this will continue to happen. The trouble is that, we have all these limitations, but a slow decoupling, Shivani, is going to take place. I mean, it's going to be painful, but it will take place for many reasons. One is, the fact that, increasing your production capacity, increasing your defense production is independent of China. You have to do it anyway, right? But there are hurdles there. Incidentally, I just wanted to mention, we have recently stopped hiring, taking on Chinese tankers to move our oil. So you see, it's in small places, which is not really, that whole charter of Chinese tankers has stopped. So this is all not in the media, but it is going on. It's going to take a while. But what I want to, as a kind of a, the things that we've done, like exercise Yuddha Abhyas, which we've been talking of, could you have imagined back in 2014 when President Xi visited us, that we would be having an exercise on the border with the US. It was unthinkable. So what China is doing is slowly pushing us away from our non-aligned view towards getting closer to other powers because we have no choice. Right? But having said that, I just want to say one wrap up to what the gentleman from Niti Aayog also said. All the things that we have to do, it has to be I sat through the whole Kargil review committee process because you had a shock when Kargil happened. Right? That was a national security architecture. We took a beating. Right now, it is not that. It is your whole economic, how you address challenges, not just from China, but from multiple areas, which is going to be the challenge as our foreign minister said, as foreign minister Jaishankar said. How do you do it? You need to bring again a group of ministers to address all these challenges, which includes military preparedness, which includes the severe ecological damage which Arunachal is taking. It's taking a beating. There has to be other ways to get your troops onto there. You have to think of new ways. For example, airfields. I mean, different things. I don't want to bring all that now. In terms of how the whole PLI scheme has been, the production incentives has come under criticism. GST earlier had come under criticism. So you need the government to sit together and decide how to go forward, because this could be a make or break moment. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on the support that India can look for, one, from other neighbors of China, Dr. Tarakarta, who are also very, very tired of China and its belligerence. And, it's got border disputes virtually with everyone. And then other like-minded democracies, as we like to say. In this front, India already seems to be going forward. What more would you like to see here?
I don't think we are going to go very much forward. I mean, now China has started its own Indian Ocean dialogue with all our neighbors, right? Which is not something which we're going to like very much. But the Quad is there, and there is your own tie-ups with Vietnam. You got your own ships going outward into those areas. In the end, like you said, it's your defense is your own business, and we don't want the US coming in a larger presence than it is at present. But there are other ways. See, the war itself has changed. You're not going to go in for an all-out Ukraine type of war here because you're a nuclear power. So the kind of things that you need will be information, will be intelligence, will be, the whole gamut of the whole data that you need to fight a war. And that is where your alliances, your friends come in, other people come in, where you can get that bolstering of an existing capability which is under stress. That's why I keep saying your defense budget is not going to rise hugely. It's not possible. So therefore, you need to come around and try to do things differently.
Okay.
And that means a whole of government approach.
Whole of government approach, absolutely. If you need to fight a big war, and I'm using war in terms of our fight with China, not a military war, then everybody needs to come together. From what I understand, all of you can nod if you agree with me, or, not nod, but turn your heads if you don't agree with me. What I'm feeling is that one, we need, some of the backlogs for us defense-wise have begun to get cleared. And even in the defense sector, Atmanirbharta has become a big thing for us. So I think those bottlenecks are beginning to be cleared, and that's a big deal. And ultimately, you do need the tanks, the planes, the equipment, etc., to fight a war and to deter a war. Second thing that I'm sensing from all of you is economics. Ultimately, the battle between India and China lies in the economy. And I think all of you seem to be in agreement of that. Dr. Kranti, I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up. Vijay Kranti, sorry.
Yeah, I think as I look at more politically and from diplomatic angle, this is time India has to realize and identify all those countries who have common interest, whether it is Vietnam, Australia, even Cambodia, Japan, South Korea, Brunei, Malaysia, all these countries who are suffering at the hands of China. They are all looking for a strong friend, a reliable friend. And I think India can work as pivot, as fulcrum of this group. India should identify those countries and should make it no need of making a defense bloc, but making a common interest bloc. Then
Okay.
I think,
Sir, I have
it
run
will
out
not
of
some
time.
great-
I do thank all of you for joining us. My message to the public is largely this. There's no point being in hysteria when something like this with China happens. You want India to be able to take on China, you've got to support your government in the way, and the only way that it can take on China. And currently, in this age, that is for India to develop at a galloping speed, because that's the only thing that will increase India's might in the rest of the world as well, and vis-a-vis China as well. So when it comes to those issues, we've got to come together and support reforms that will take us there. That's really my take from this. I thank our guests for joining us. And speaking of this skirmish between India and China, my colleague Akash also sends us this ground report from Arunachal Pradesh. Listen in.
I'm at Jamiri village as of now. This is the second time when this clash has happened. And the location is very crucial because till 2022, we have seen almost every clash, almost every friction point in eastern Ladakh, in the western sector of the actual line of control. However, this time in Arunachal Pradesh, we have seen this sort of clash. And, also in 2021, yes, we have reported that in 2021 there was a face of kind of situation. But this time it was a clash. Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has confirmed that. Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has, actually told us that how it happened, how, it was an attempt to change the status quo of that particular area. And how, China got the befitting reply from Indian Army. But as of now, I'm just 100 kilometers away from the location. And, I'll try to show you the actual terrain. As of now, this particular road, in fact, is constructed by Border Road Organization. And as far as the particular branch of Indian Army is concerned, so Indian Army, this particular branch is basically responsible, for the construction of road nearby the border areas. And as far as Arunachal Pradesh is concerned, so, there are areas that are still not connected to roads. In fact, construction work is already going on. And, this is why when we talk about the capabilities, this is when, we talk about the readiness of Indian Army. The infrastructure, the road construction plays an important role.
Well, exactly what we were talking about earlier and highlighting. And there is, of course, some way for India to go as far as being as prepared and having as much infrastructure at the border areas as China is concerned. Well, that was the news till now. Before we slip into a very short break,